is Philadelphia Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni meddling with the offense? Not only with the offense, is he meddling with the defensive play calls that's been brought into question recently?
On defense one time as well, made a call on defense. That didn't work out, just so you know. I'll put that out there. That wasn't on Vic. I won't tell you which play.
This all comes from really three places. And the first place that it comes from is directly from Nick Sirianni's mouth himself, because Nick likes to be that guy who will be the proverbial fall on the sword type of head coach. He's a guy who likes to divert attention. And I do think that sometimes we need to realize when he's doing this to us, guys. There are times where it's very blatantly obvious that there's a lot of gray area Nick's not discussing with this stuff, and he's diverting your attention directly towards him because he wants to relieve some of the attention off of his play callers, his coaches, and his players. And a great example of this came during Sunday's press conference following the Cleveland game, where he let out this whole thing about basically defensive play calling and him bringing something into Vic's ear. When truth be told, any of you guys who've ever played at a high level, any of you guys who've ever coached at the high school level or beyond, you know dang right well what he was saying here, guys. He's not talking about picking a direct play per se. He's talking about what we call tempoing. Whether you're tempoing the offense or you're tempoing the defense, that's what he means, guys, when he says words such as concede or attack.
Nick, are you really calling defensive plays on occasion, or is that just more of a shield for your coaches?
No, I think it's very common in the NFL when the head coach gets on and says, attack, concede, come on, let's get after these guys. And I think that, that's where that comes from. And then there's personal philosophies that I have of how to play certain situations that you talk through. And so it wouldn't be fair for me to have the philosophies that I have and push that on my coaches and then not take accountability for it when the play doesn't work.
He's not giving you a direct play per se, but he's telling the coach, he's telling the play caller, either I want a tempo towards this or I want a tempo towards that. Which, by the way, it's normal. It's very normal for any head coach, guys. That should not surprise you guys. If you guys thought that he wasn't doing that, you probably need to learn a little bit more about how play calling works, to be honest. The second place that this is occurring, guys, a couple of weeks ago, they released a chart it showed you weeks 1 through weeks 4, right? And on that chart, they showed you the motion rate across the NFL, and they gave you 2 actual data points, but no one paid attention to the second data point. I'm going to give you some information about that second data point. Everyone paid attention to the initial data point, which he was highlighting, which was basically motion at the snap. So when the ball snapped, is there motion occurring at that time? And the Eagles ranked 19th in the NFL of doing that. Now, I will say this. There was a lot of panic around this stuff where people were like, oh, my God, this is not, Kellen Moore's offense. I mean, you're not wrong. It's not 100% Kellen Moore's offense. I think where you're wrong is when people like me tried to tell you back during the offseason that despite what we're hearing, understand that Kellen Moore's the point man, right? He's the guiding hand over the offense. But anytime you do an install of an offense or a defense, anytime you install a system, you're going to bring together competing interests, guys. I mean, you're going to work with guys who are going to represent different interests, and it's your job, if you're the head coach or if you're the OC or the DC, whoever is the point person on it, to bring all those voices together along with your quarterback to find a system that's congruent for success. Okay? In this situation, I don't think that people are correct in assuming that Nick Sirianni was direct in this. I think he was indirectly represented by people like Kevin Patullo, by people like Jeff Stoutland, and people like Jalen Hurts. I don't think Nick had to be so direct with what he wanted from his own system and be brought into this mesh, this merging of systems between Kellen Moore with his, because he already had people there to represent his interests, guys. That's what I'm getting to, okay? The third place I saw this happening was coming from the NFL.com's website, and if you go to their advanced analytics, you started seeing people throw up the route distribution charts. And they were showing Keenan Allen versus A.J. Brown. And they were saying basically, like, if you look at these two, this doesn't look like the same system, doesn't look like the same scheme. And while I do think there is an underlying point that is correct in what they're saying, I do think the way in which they're trying to prove their point is highly flawed. But we're going to break all this stuff down one by one, guys. And I'm going to give you tips of where you can actually find this information on your own and how these essentially these analytic database, brokers. So you're talking about PFF, if you're talking about, next gen stats, if you're talking about AWS, which is Amazon's version, if you're talking about, StatHead, which is Pro Football Focus's version, they use these codes that they put into a programming language, a statistical programming language to pull this information out. And I'm going to show you how you can do that, guys, if you're interested and actually wanted to go forth with something like that. To begin with, we got to talk about Nick's words, and let's talk about that tempoing thing that I brought up earlier. When Nick says stuff such as like, I made this call, and it's on a controversial call. We have to understand that sometimes he's being outright truthful about it, right? Like when he talks about the red zone and goal line situations, like, yeah, head coaches are going to have influence there, guys. Like, come on now. You shouldn't need us to tell you that. Like, you should know that offhand. If you didn't think that was going to, like, come on, man. Like, I'm sorry. Like, come on. You're not being realistic. Of course head coaches have an input there. Now, the value and the degree to which the input occurs is where things can get in the gray area, right? Because you can be tempoing. He could be saying, I want to attack here. He could be saying, I want to concede here, right? He could be simply, what is the more likelihood is if he's pulling directly from a play in the red zone. You guys have to understand that things are scripted, right? It goes through your game plan. You're going to script X amount of plays. Normally your first 15 plays or so are scripted, right? In terms of your game plan. Past that, guys, you're going to work on the things you want to do on third down, right? You're going to work on your 2-minute offense. You're going to work on your 4-minute offense for that game. And then you're also going to work on your red zone stuff. Your goal line and your red zone stuff. Those things are normally highly scripted. Okay, there's X amount of plays you want to run there. So even if Nick is saying like, hey, let's do this, look, we've been pushing for X amount of plays, let's do this off counter. It's not that big of a surprise, guys. Like, it's something that they had already worked and talked about. It's not something that Kellen Moore's in the dark about. It's not something that Jalen Hurts is in the dark about. Now, where I will argue is on the particular play that we are referencing, I believe was the New Orleans Saints game, if I'm not mistaken, to where they tried to basically fake the tush push and run outside. It was either the Saints or the Atlanta game where they tried to do this. If you looked at the timestamp of when it occurred, that decision going into halftime, given that timestamp in the play you're calling, I disagree with that. I do think that fundamentally that was a bad call, and they need to reevaluate and dig a little deeper into when you use those plays and why you use certain plays, right? So it's definitely good to try to catch people off guard and mix them up, but there's got to be cues that we're teaching people, too, to pay attention to the way that, the defensive line, that front seven is playing it. Because in that particular situation, they were kind of expecting it, and we probably should have tush-pushed, to be quite honest, to pick up that first down.
This year. Oh, they got a little fake. It's Barkley out the back door. Not gonna.
So, there's things there to where he's saying these things, and it's bringing in controversy. But there's the aspect of critiquing and criticizing like that play where I do think Nick deserves criticism for it. But there's also don't bite. Don't bite all the time, guys. Don't bite on every one of these narratives. Sometimes this is a intentful deflection, and Nick knows what he's doing. He's not nearly as dumb as people think. He knows what he's doing at times, guys. He's purposely deflecting. He wants all the eyes on him at times to do this stuff. You got to watch out for that stuff, guys, because they're setting us up for the okie doke at times with that crap. All right, the number 2 thing that has been discussed recently, and I just want to bring this up a little bit about motion. And I'm going to throw you guys a bone here because I think people are making too big of a deal about this, and I think that there's a lot of gray area when we talk about motion and the Philadelphia Eagles' lack of motion so far this season. Let's be clear. It is up over last year. We are motioning way more than we did the year prior. However, it probably hasn't raised to the level of expectation that we all had, if we're being honest, right? I know some of you guys probably had aspirations we'd be top 5. Some of you probably thought top 10. I was never really in on that. I thought that it was always going to be a mixture and a merger. So I was always like, somewhere between 12 and 16, 10 and 16 in that area. That's where I thought they would fall. And to be fair, when you look at the list that was provided for motion rate between weeks 1 through 4, at the snap, they ranked 19th. But in that, there's more gray area, guys, because you notice the words I said at the snap. So when and where the motion is occurring tells you there's actual precedent and there's reason for this, right? Like, it's not as black and white as we like to make it sometimes. There's a large amount of gray area to this stuff, to be quite honest. Because if you went past just at the snap and you looked at total motion, so motion that's occurring not just at the snap, but just in general during the play, well, this is going to tick some of you guys off because it doesn't support some of the things I've said earlier, but I'm just being honest. I'm giving you the raw data, guys. The Eagles ranked 27th in overall motion. 44.9%, which I believe the year prior, guys, I have it written down in my notes. I want to say that we were at like 23% motion rate. So we're in that area, 22, 23%. So, I mean, we are definitely up. So on pass plays, it was 23.88% motion. So going from 23.88% motion to 44.9%, I mean, that's a pretty big boost, guys, in terms of motion in the offense. For being honest, it's a lot lower on the scale than we thought we'd see, right? We were thinking certainly top 20 in all-around motion, and it's not there. I want to preface this, though, by saying a couple things here. Number one, the mitigating circumstances that face the Eagles, and we have to be aware of that. You know, we played a game where at the end of the game, we were down A.J. Brown, we were down, Devontae Smith, we were down Lane Johnson, and we were down Mekhi Becton, and the Eagles did really well in that game. They fought through it, and they won a game against New Orleans, who looked unstoppable at the time we played them. And we were really the first team to kind of say, hold on a minute, maybe this team is good, but not nearly as good as people think. Okay? That's a tough one, guys. When you're down that many people, I can understand why late in that game, why they might have started to move away from motioning a little bit there. And then you come back the next, that following week, and now you're playing without A.J. Brown. You're going to play without Devontae Smith. You're going to play without Lane Johnson. And you're going to play Mekhi Becton, but with a cast on his hand, right? He had I don't know if he had a hard cast or a soft cast, but he had a cast on his hand in that game. So what I'm trying to get you guys here into the gray area is, well, sure, this could have been Nick saying like, hey, Kellen, maybe this isn't the day for a lot of motion. Maybe we need to pull from our install and build a game plan around concepts where we don't use motion quite as much. We need to be a little bit more factory reset here because we have a quarterback who is learning how to set protections, how to slide protections. The first year that he's had the autonomy to do all this stuff. And on top of that, we got a guy at right guard with a cast on his hand, and we're down our right tackle, and we're our outside receiving threats are down too. There's a chance that Nick and who I think is the more likely culprit to say this, guys, Jeff Stoutland, probably said, hey, man, this is probably not the week for that. Because the thing is about motioning, and you guys have to understand this, is when you motion and you move the defense, you now allow the defense or you invite the defense to start moving as well. So if you got a front seven that moves late on you, it can change your protection scheme. It can change your blocking scheme. That may have been something that Stout was not excited about, given the circumstances of having outside threats gone and having the right side of his line a little at that time. I mean, we have to factor this, guys. There's a lot of gray area in this stuff. I don't know how to factor in each component and, the fact that we are meshing a system together and where we're at in terms of meshing that. The fact that we do have a quarterback who is new to the duties of setting protections and things like that. And the fact that we were dealing with a lot of mitigating circumstances like injuries. It's hard to factor all this stuff, guys. I don't think that any one thing is the sole reason. I think it's all these things together. The meshing of systems, a quarterback that's new to the duties, injuries along the line and on the outside receiving threats. I think all of it kind of played together to be honest about the situation. I just think that we're lacking a little bit of the context of things at times, to be quite honest. All right, the last part I want to break down for you guys, I want to provide a little context to. Oh, actually, hang on. I forgot. I promised you I would show you how these dudes are actually getting the data for motion. In order to get the data for motion, guys, you got to go to a program called RStudio. Okay, you got to download it. They make it for Apple products, and you can also download it for Windows products as well. So you want to go to RStudio. Okay, you have to download RStudio. Once you download RStudio, you have to basically install a code. You have to write it in a code that's called NFL Fast R or NFL Faster. It's NFL Fast and then literally R, okay? Once you install NFL Fast R in there, you have a program language that will then scan each and every play-by-play book, and it will pull out data points for you to have some form of an analytical study against things such as personnel utilization. So we're talking about personnel frequency usage. So 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 21 personnel, so forth and so forth, right? You can look at things such as DVOA. You can find out DVOA information in terms of sorting it by teams and things like that, knowing that kind of detailed information, right? And you can find also things such as motion, okay? So what they're using to do this, guys, is a program called RStudio. It's a programming language that's used for basically essentially statistical computing and then some form of to identify graphics and things like that, okay? But mainly what they're using it for is that statistical computing capacity of the program, okay? and then they use NFL Fast R within our studio to pull that information, guys. You do need to know the programming language, or it's kind of hard. There are all kinds of tutorials online, guys. You can learn how to do it. I'm going to be honest with you. When I personally use it, I'm using code that's already been built in by other people. I'm still learning how to program the language myself in terms of coding it. So that's where they're getting this detailed information from. That's where all these people are getting the information from. All right, part three. Part three is about the distribution charts that are being thrown out there, guys. There's an element of truth to this, right? We're not attacking the middle of the field from a standpoint evaluating the entire season, if you will. We have not attacked the middle of the field. It can be shown in terms of like the spray charts for the quarterbacks. You can also look at the route development stuff. But where I think things got a little disingenuous recently is when people were pulling up things such as Keenan Allen's route distribution chart from week 3 of 2023, and then they compared it to A.J. Brown's week 6, route distribution chart for the 2024 season. And it's really a target distribution more than it is a route distribution, for being honest about what they're showing you. The problem I have with this is two things. Number one, like using a 1 week sample to try to illustrate a large point like this. That ain't how that's done, Chief. No, that's I'm sorry, that's a lazy analysis. But number two, the problem I have with this is that Keenan Allen and A.J. Brown are not the same type of receiver. These are different types of receivers, man. That tells you nothing. It's absolutely nothing. A.J. Brown is an isolation player, man. He's a guy, when you're going to your 3x1 stacks, you generally speaking want to have him in isolation on the boundary. He's the man press beater. They're both great route runners in their own right. They're both really good football players, man. I love Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's a Greensboro guy. He went to high school like 4 or 5 miles down the street here off of Church Street, out here at Northern Guilford. His brother is an absolute legend out here in Greensboro. He played over for the Whirlies over by UNCG. He was a quarterback out there. His older brother. I love Keenan Allen, man. He's a really good football player. Not the same type of guy. So when you're using that tells you nothing. That's not an apples for apples comparison. And I get that no comparison is going to be apples for apples, but I mean, this is like apples to broccoli. We're not even in the same friggin' vegetable group here. Well, we're not in the same food group here, right? We're comparing fruit to vegetables, essentially. What I think is the issue here is that if you were to take that same analysis and you took Devontae Smith's week 6, chart, and you compared that to, Keenan Allen's week 3 chart from 2023 compared to Devontae Smith's, week 6, 2024 chart, it looks a lot similar, guys. It's not apples for apples here, but you can see the concepts. That's because Devontae Smith is used a little bit more in the Keenan Allen role than, what you're looking at here with a player like A.J. Brown. If you're going to judge A.J. Brown, then you got to go to like the Mike Williams, right, and the Quinston Johnstons. That's the kind of role that he plays, for what those guys were doing for the Chargers offense the year prior with Kellen Moore. So it's a little deceptive in the way they were trying to employ that. It's detached from the reality of the situation. Now, at the heart of what they're trying to get to, which is we're not utilizing the middle of the field, I mean, it's twofold here. Number one, we were playing a single high safety, so they're closing off the middle of the field, guys. That explains some of the reason why they may not have attacked the middle of the field. But if you're looking at it from a season total over 5 games, the data we can look at over 5 games, we're not attacking the middle of the field. Some of that has to do with the system that's in place, clearly, but a lot of that has to do with Jalen Hurts, too. And here's my thing, guys. I don't know if it's going to get better, if it's going to get worse in terms of attacking the middle of the field, in terms of using pre-snap motion. I mean, that's all to be determined, guys, right? I mean, to be quite honest. However, there is reason to suspect that you take what the quarterback is comfortable with and what he knows, and you add in a little bit of yours, and as you get through the first quarter of the season, you get to the second quarter of the season, to the third quarter of the season, to the fourth quarter of the season, little by little, you start expanding upon the new stuff within the system. It gets a little bit more expansive, 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 right? My hope is that, we find a way, and I don't know how likely it is, I don't know what it's going to look like in terms of being able to do that, but if we find a way of keeping Kellen Moore in the city for 2 years, and you get a 2-year period to evaluate all this, then I think you got a much fairer evaluation, right? You got a much fairer evaluation about how the Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore system kind of came together. Because what you got here are competing factions, right? You got Stout, and you got Kevin Patullo, Jason Michaels, who's a tight end coach. All these dudes have all, had experience calling plays before at some point in their careers. I don't know about Stout. I think Stout did actually at one point in college, but Stout, I'm not too sure about. I know Jason Michaels. I know Kevin Patel. I know those guys did. They're experienced guys. So you got those guys who are bringing in the system as they know it, as the one that's been around here, competing against the interest of a Kellen Moore, competing against the interest of, our quarterback coach, Nussmeier. So you got these two things coming together, and I think you'll get a more fair evaluation if you see that over a 2-year period, right? Because you should keep seeing the continual expansion until it reaches its full fruition in terms of this system of what it is in terms of the full mesh between the two concepts. Right now, I think you're heavy on one side of the concept compared to the other. Sometimes I think matchups will dictate when one side of that is more heavy than the other, right? For whatever reason, they saw something in Green Bay. Maybe they just had a lot of time to practice it. I don't know. But they definitely used more motion in Green Bay than they did in weeks 2, 3, and weeks 4. I have not evaluated week 6 yet, guys. I have to run that through the program. I have to watch it on tape, chart it the old school way where you got to chart it by hand instead of using an algorithm to do that. It's going to take time, guys. It's going to take some time to do that. So, I don't know. Is Nick Sirianni meddling? I think the question's a little, to be quite honest. I don't know that this is a case of meddling. It's like a lot of people kept asking, well, what does Nick Sirianni do? Boy, that question's not being asked anymore, is it? Now some people are kind of catching on that, like, yeah, a head coach doesn't just do nothing. Like, a head coach has a role. Right now, if you're asking me what Nick Sirianni should be doing, and not what he does, but what should he be doing, hey, Nick, this is, no matter what, man, this is Nick's offense. No matter what, this is Nick's defense. No matter what, this is Nick's team because he's the head coach. Okay? You got to figure out that run defense from a 4-man front, brother. Anytime we're in that 2-4 front, we're just not good. We're just not good at stopping the run like that. We got to get answers for that, to be quite honest, especially on the inside zone stuff. Offensively, we got to figure out these slow starts. Like, that falls on Nick, man. Nick's got to be more active in that, to be quite honest, because ultimately it's his head. It's his head if we don't get this turned around. So he's going to have to be more active, man, or he will be out of a job, in my opinion, if you don't turn that around, because I don't know how you come back from that personally, guys. I mean, I think it's quite obvious if you're just deficient like that you can't keep blaming it on your coordinators. Like, it's going to come back on you, so you have to be somewhat active. I mean, there's a difference between, like, meddling to a point to where you're harming the team and, like, meddling to the point to where, like, you have a job to do. I'm sorry, but that's part of the head coach's job duties, even if you're an executive head coach. You still got to, there's parts where you got to be involved, bro. They got to be better with the 2-minute offense. I think they're really good at the 4-minute offense concept of things, but the 2-minute offense I still think needs some work, man.
We had a mindset there of, hey, let's not give this ball back. Don't put our defense in a position where they got to stop them in 2 minutes. Kellen called a perfect game at the end of that game. He threw it when he needed to throw it. He ran it when he needed to run it. Our guys executed, but our guys just made a play in a 4-minute scenario. We've lost a couple games in 4 minutes where we've given the ball back to the defense, to the offense, and we had the mindset of, hey, we're going to end with this ball with this ball in our hands.
I mean, we were a drop away or a better play call away from essentially being right now 4-1 instead of 3-2. One of the guys who's incredibly talented here, you're the head coach, man. You got to figure out how to manage this young man. I love Saquon Barkley, brother, but going out of bounds before getting the first down on that play, unacceptable. Missing the block that resulted in a sack and it forces into a 57-yard field goal that then got blocked and got returned for a touchdown, unacceptable for Saquon Barkley. Dropping a wide open pass that probably at minimal keeps running the clock, but likely converts into a first down and closes out the Atlanta game. Unacceptable for a dude like Saquon Barkley. Now, am I saying that Nick should be benching him and trying to make up? No, dude. Don't overdo stuff. That dude's still really a good football player. Like, it's hard. It's a really hard discussion because I don't know that there are, like, proof positive things to say to what you're supposed to do in that situation. Other than you're the head coach, so you better figure it out. Because Saquon Barkley can't be actively causing struggles like that, dropping footballs on games that could have converted and closed it out, going out of bounds on a conversion down, and then missing a block and resulting us into a 57-yard field goal that gets blocked. Like, he can't be that guy. He can't be the guy that causes those things. Like, he can't. He just cannot be the guy that causes that. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed from this offense and, like, in defense, to be quite honest, that, Nick still has a responsibility of he's the guy. Whether he's directly or indirectly going to be the person, He's a person that has to correct it, whether it's directly or indirectly. So, I don't know, guys. We'll continue. There's a lot more to talk about, guys. We got more videos coming up this week. There's so much to uncover here. I think we definitely needed to dive in, and I think we need to talk about the lack of production and early downs with the Philadelphia Eagles. The lack of production, when I say early downs, what I really mean is early possessions. The first 2 possessions of the first quarter of games in particular. Like, we got a problem, guys. We got some problems we need to discuss that's going on with this Philadelphia Eagles team. All right, y'all. I appreciate y'all staying around for this long video, but I thought this topic was something that deserved more than like 5 minutes of coverage. It probably deserved a much more expansive talking point about it. I do think that, yes, I mean, obviously Nick is meddling because it's his team. I just think that the narrative is a little flawed. Like, of course, your head coach is going to have responsibility in certain aspects of things. I just think people were unrealistic to the job duties and responsibilities of a head coach, even if they're an executive head coach. Like, they still have to partake in this stuff, guys. I know that a lot of things I presented today are indirect, not direct. There are some direct things, though, guys. Like, he did admit that he told Vic Fangio essentially how he wanted to, pace the game. He talked about that, the rhythm of that game. He talked about, look, I don't know if he said attack or if he said to concede. He wouldn't tell us that, but he stepped up for saying, like, hey, man, there are times where I tell tempo. I give, direction on tempo. Then he's got direct play calling. I know that it's still a little indirect because it's, those things are already set up in the game plan. But Nick gave, his viewpoint. He gave his view about a particular play in a particular moment, in a game to where it's natural for a head coach to do that. But he made a bad choice. Given the time constraints, I understand it was a good choice from like, oh, they're never going to, thinking that we got to keep teams honest. They can't always just assume we're going to, they got to know that they got to defend the outside against us at times too. But like, bro, I think it was like 12 seconds on the clock. What were you thinking? We got to get better in those areas, guys. Got to get better. Peace, man. I appreciate y'all talking. Listen, YouTube thinks that you would enjoy this video right here. If you'd like to join the Cerebral Football community, hey, man, right here, I'd love to add you. I'm out of here, guys.